All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. Very exciting daf ahead of us today. To begin by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drushos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Dina Bas Pesach, Zecharia ben Zecharia, whose yard sites are in the month of Adar. We hope on the merit of our Talmud Torah, then Hashem will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. We also thank our Day of Learning sponsors, Ephraim and Shifra Abramson, in the Zechus for an aliyah's neshama for Ephraim's mothers, her yard site Chava Bas Moshe Shalom. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, Hashem will have an aliyah in the family a nechama. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors, our sponsors for the parak of our Pesachim, Maishi and Chavi Abramson, for dedicating the entire parak as a zechus for Refuah Shalema for Daniel Meir Ben Chana, and our Daf Yomi share sponsor today, Samuel Slomowitz, with ongoing appreciation and gratitude for all of the meaningful shiurim. And with that, let us begin. Good. All right. At least I got through the sponsorships. Good. So again, let's begin Daf Kuf Avav. So today's Daf 106. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem. We left off in the middle of the Shema Minaz, and on the last line of Kuf Hamid Beis 105b. So remember again, we had the fascinating brisa of Hanichnas lebeitzo b'matzei Shabbos. One goes in and enters the house on Matzei Shabbos. And from that particular episode, from that particular brisa, the Gemara gleaned 8 different lessons. So we left off again on the last line of Kuf Hamid Beis 105b. The Gemara says, Shema mina hamavarich tzarich sheyitom. So again, amongst the lessons learned, we learned the idea that a person who goes ahead and makes the bracha on the kos has to taste from the kos. Shema mina ta'ama pagmo. We also learned the halacha that once you go ahead and you drink from a kos shel bracha, the cup becomes pagum. Pag rabosai means literally again means damaged, right? And once something becomes quote unquote halachically damaged, it can no longer be used for another mitzvah. So once you go ahead and you drink from a kos, that kos cannot be used for another mitzvah. And again, remember, the Gemara is learning that out from the fact that, remember, we're talking about a case where there was one cup that you had to go ahead and figure out how to use for both benching and havdalah. Shema mina tam pagmo, shema mina tam mavdil. We also learned the concept that halacha l'maisa, and we'll discuss this in greater depth today. There's going to be an interesting machlokes regarding what happens if one ate before havdalah. Right? We learned in yesterday's daf. We even saw the halacha l'maisa l'shulchan aruch that one is not supposed to eat before havdalah, with the exception of water. Right? One could drink water before havdalah, but aside from that, one should not eat before havdalah. So the interesting question that will come up is what happens if one did eat? What happens if halacha l'maisa one ate before havdalah? So we're going to see an interesting machlokes that there's an opinion that says if you ate on Matzei Shabbos before havdalah, you don't make havdalah that night. Instead, you wait until the next day, Sunday, to go ahead and make havdalah. The Gemara says, you see from here, ta'am mavdil, that even if a person ate before they went ahead and they made havdalah, we still make havdalah that night on Matzei Shabbos. Daf of Kovav, u'shma mina, Omre beis kidushos al kos echad. What else? We learned that you could say 2 brachas. You could say 2 brachas on 1 cup. So we'll say, remember again, even though we said in yet last week's daf, then ein onutzim mitzvos chavilos, that normally we don't go ahead and do mitzvos bundle. We don't bundle mitzvos. We don't do multiple mitzvos on. I waited as long as I could. I'm sorry. Right? So even though again we don't normally say that halacha l'maisa, we go ahead and we do mitzvahs chavilos. We don't normally bundle mitzvahs, but remember again when heicha delo efshar, when I have no choice. For example, in this case over here, normally I would not recite Birkas Hamazon and havdalah on 1 kos. Because again, that's osim mitzvahs chavilos. But in this case, I only have 1 cup. So because I only have 1 cup, I do 2 mitzvahs on 1 cup. Ushma mina beishamai va'ali b'drab Yehuda. And ultimately, again, just see this brisa happen to quote the opinion of Beishamai according to Rabbi Yehuda's version. I will say again, for our purposes, halacha l'maisa, that last piece is not such an important lesson for us because we don't accept Beishamai's opinion, but rather, again, we accept Beis Hillel's opinion. Namely, that the proper order for Matzei Shabbos is hagafen, misamim, ner, and havdalah. So the Gemara says, Rav Ashi says, Tamo pagmo, ukol shel bracha tzarich shir chad hamilsi. So all Rav Ashi says is it's not really 8 takeaways, but it's really 7 takeaways, because you could collapse 2 of the lessons into one lesson. Namely, which 2? The concept of tamo pagmo, which means that once you go ahead and you drink from a kosher bracha, you make it pagum. You make it pagum. And therefore, again, you can't use it for another bracha. So Rav Ashi says that concept of tamo pagmo and kos shel bracha tzarich shir, that a kosher bracha requires a requisite amount, or at least the revius, Rav Ashi really holds it's one idea. Why is it one idea? He says, Vachi kamar, my taima tamo pagmo. Why is it that when you taste from a kosher bracha, you make it pagum? Mishum the kosher bracha tzarich shir. Because halacha l'maisa kosher bracha requires a shir. So he holds that the idea is once you drink from it, it no longer has the shir. And once it no longer has the shir, therefore it can't be used for another bracha. Now the truth is, we actually don't accept that premise, because we understand that pagum and shir are really 2 different things. This goes back to our bracha stage. Really 2 different things. Yes, a kosher bracha requires the shir, right? A kosher bracha has to hold at least the revius. We'll say it's very important. It's very important all the time for Kiddush, but as we come up to Dalet Kosos on Pesach, right? Again, it's good, Dalet Kosos, we're going to discuss this, but Dalet Kosos has an interesting concept, because not only does the kos supposed to have shir, but for Dalet Kosos, you're also supposed to drink rov kos, the majority of the cup, which is why it's good for Leil HaSeder to use smaller cups. This way you could drink a shir, you could also drink rov kos. So we hold the idea is, even if you have a very large kos, let's say you have a kos that holds, whatever it is, 10 ounces, much more than the shir. Once you take a sip from that cup, you can't use it for another kosher bracha. So for example, and we'll discuss this in greater depth, let's remember, you can make Kiddush as many times as you want over the course of Shabbos. Many people take advantage of this halacha, right, on Shabbos. Meaning the idea is, let's say, I go ahead and make Kiddush, I'm at home, I make Kiddush, and then, my company was running late, then they came, they asked me to make Kiddush again. Let's say I have a very large kos. If I make Kiddush and drink from that cup, I can't use that wine again for Kiddush. Because once you go ahead and you drink from it, then halacha l'maisa you make it pagum, even if the shir is in there. So even if there's multiple revesim in there. Now, of course, we'll discuss there's a way to remedy that. There's a very easy way to remedy a kos that's pagum, which is how you add more wine. So once you add more wine, it's no longer pagum. But I just want to point out, Rav Ashi understands that pagum and shir are 2 sides of the same coin. Halacha l'maisa, we don't accept that premise. Pagum is one halacha, shir is a different halacha. Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi kaped achasa. So we'll say this is very interesting. Achatz b'pegima. So we'll say, now that the Gemara introduced this concept of pagum, right? Pagum literally means like deficient or damaged, which means once you drink from a kos shel bracha, you cannot use that same cup to make another bracha. Now, when I say another bracha, I don't mean hagafen. I really mean another mitzvah. You can't use it for kiddush or birkas hamazon. So we'll say now, Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi says something very interesting. What happens if you have a pitcher of wine, and you drank from the pitcher? So this is different, right? So now, and by the way, also you can imagine you have a decanter, right? And you go and you drink from the decanter. So now, obviously, it's a much larger quantity of wine. Does drinking from the pitcher make the entire pitcher pagum or not? So Rav Yaakov bar Idi says yes. He says even if you drink, it's not just a din in a cup of wine, but even a pitcher of wine. The Gemara says Rav Idi bar Shisha kapit akasa pegima. Rav Idi bar Shisha said no. The truth is the din of pagum really only applies to a kos, to a cup of wine. But drinking from a much larger receptacle will not go ahead and make the pitcher. For example, he would disagree in the pitcher case. He says the concept of pagum really only applies to you drinking from a cup. But if you're drinking from a larger receptacle, it's not a problem. Mar bar Avashi kapit afilu achavisa pigimasa. But listen to this. Mar bar Avashi said, even if you drink from a barrel, ultimately, again, you would make that barrel pagum. So we'll say, so that obviously is even a much greater stringency. So if you look at the Rashbam says afilu achavisa. So we'll say this is in the intermediate wide lines, about 6 lines in. Afilu achavisa chavios ketanos avalim chavesh la'is kidola in lahakbid. So the Rashbam adds in something very interesting over here. He understands that chavisa is a reference to a small barrel. A small barrel. that if you drink from a small barrel, you can make the barrel pagum. But the Rashbam says, if you were to drink from a very large barrel, so what's the right? If you ever go to a winery, right, they store the wine in these very large barrels. So the Rashbam would say, if you were to drink from the large barrel, that wouldn't make it pagum. So Yabos like, what everyone's struggling with is the following, which is everyone agrees that when you go and you drink from a cup, that makes the remaining wine pagum. Can't use it for another mitzvah. The shaila is, how far do you extend that out? So that's the tension over here. So you have Rav Idi Bar Shisha saying it's you have Rav Yaakov Bar Idi saying it's a pitcher. You have Rav Idi Bar Shisha saying it's only a cup. And you have Mar Bar Ravashi saying even a barrel. But the Rashbam is saying only a small barrel. Only a small barrel. So we'll say, so very interesting. So how do we pass in halacha l'maisa? Because we'll say, this is actually important to halacha. Because I'll just give you a simple example. Again, you go ahead and you want to sample the wine before you make kiddush, and you take a drink out of the bottle. Not suggesting it, but l'maisa you do it. So what happens what's the status now of that bottle of gabi kiddush? So we'll say, so now listen to this. So the Shulchan Aruch Paskins, this is in Siman Kuf Pei Beis Sif Gimel. Sarech Shelo Yehe Pagum. The wine that you use for Kiddush, and it happens to be, these halachos that I'm quoting to over here, Kuf Pei Beis, are the halachos of Birkas Hamazon, halachos of benching. So he's talking over here about the coast of benching, but it's the same halacha for any time you want to use a coast for mitzvah. Tzar Shelo Yehe Pagum. Shimshasa Mimenu Pegamo. If you drink from so he's talking about bepashtas a cup. If you drink from a cup of wine, the remaining wine becomes pagum. Aval im shafach mimenu lusoch yado okli im bekach klum. So, however, halacha l'maisa, the only time you make a cup of wine pagum is when you directly drink from the cup. But for example, if you were to pour some of the wine into your hands, or you were to pour some of the wine into a different utensil, that does not make the remainder of the cup pagum. Ein bekach klum. Va'afilu shasa mehakad or mechavis kitana havi pagum. And even if you drink from a pitcher or from a small barrel, you make the remaining wine pagum. Aval im shasa mechavis shalitz gidola ein lahakpid. But halacha l'maisa, if you drank from a large wooden barrel, you don't have to be makpid. You don't render the rest of the wine pagum. Now, boss, interestingly enough, so what the Mishnah Berurah, so for example, Shulchan Aruch says, like, if you were to go over to a large barrel of wine in a winery, and you were to drink from the spigot on the so halacha l'maisa, you would not render the rest of the wine in the barrel pagum. Now, the Mishnah Berurah comments on this, and he says, V'yesh machmirin af bazeh. Some are machmir even with this. Ve'eshlacho shel divrei lechatchila shelo lahaniach lishtos afilu mipi barza mechaves kidola. Mishnah Berurah says there are those who are machmir and one should be machmir. Therefore, don't drink from the spigot of a large barrel. Okay, so we'll say, halacha l'maisa, the way we conduct ourselves is anytime you drink from a receptacle that contains wine, whether it's something small like a cup or something large like a wooden barrel, halacha l'maisa, we would consider the rest of the contents of that utensil to be pagum and unusable for a kos shel bracha. Incredible. Let's go back. Turn our banan. Zachar Yom Shabbos the kacho. Zachar Yayis. We'll say very interesting Gemara. Bryce says. Pasuk says, Zachar Yom Shabbos the kacho. Remember the Shabbos day to sanctify it. So we learn from here. Zachreu al hayayim. So we'll say, so remember again, technically speaking, we mentioned this in yesterday's daf, one could fulfill the biblical obligation of Kiddush through a simple recitation, as we do, right? When we daven, and we daven Mariv, and we say Vayichulu, that is biblical Kiddush. Well, this is a whole discussion in the Mishnah Berurah. If you daven Kabbalah Shabbos, you said Vayichulu. So if I daven in Shul, then halacha l'maisa again, I have fulfilled the biblical obligation of Kiddush. When I come home, so my wife and my children, let's say again, my wife and my daughters are home, so they have not yet fulfilled the biblical obligation of Kiddush, which creates an interesting halachic anomaly. I have fulfilled the biblical obligation of Kiddush. My wife and my daughters have not fulfilled the biblical obligation of Kiddush. So what's the problem now? I'm going to make Kiddush halakos. I am going to be motzi them their chiyuv daraisa. But I myself am only chayiv midrabanan. How could a drabanan be motzi a daraisa? So the Mishnah Berurah gives a very simple solution. What's the simple solution? Say good Shabbos. Say good Shabbos, because technically speaking, when you say good Shabbos, that is also the biblical obligation of Kiddush. interestingly enough. Just any statement, declarative statement that it is Shabbos, by definition, fulfills the biblical obligation. So as long as you walk into your house and you wish the members of your household to get Shabbos, which is an important thing anyway, so that by the time everybody gets to the table, everybody's only a dirabanan for Kiddush, and now you can make Kiddush ala kos. Pretty incredible. So the Gemara says as follows, Imi ela bayom. I only know that I have an obligation to make Kiddush by day. The Gemara is saying because it says Zachar es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho B'Layla Minayin. How do I know that there's an obligation to make Kiddush at night as well? Talmud Lomar Zachar es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. Therefore, the pasuk says, remember Shabbos day to sanctify it. So the Gemara says, 1 second. B'Layla Minayin. You're asking me how do I know that I have an obligation to make Kiddush at night? Hadirabo. Ikir Kiddusha Balaylahu. Balaylu Kaddish. Tichi Kaddish Tchilas Yoma Baila Kiddusha. So first of all, again, it makes the most sense that the most intuitive and logical and obvious Kiddush is at night. Why? Because also at night is when Shabbos starts. So it makes most sense that the primary Kiddush is going to be at the start of the day. So first of all, it's interesting that the Gemara takes it for granted that there's Kiddush by day, and the Shaila that the Gemara is asking is Balayla Minayin. What do you mean Balayla Minayin? Of course you're going to make Kiddush at night, because nighttime is the start of Shabbos. Visu, furthermore, the Gemara asks Balayla Minayin, the Gemara asks the Kasha, from where do I know that I make Kiddush at night? Talmud Lomar, Zachar es Yom. Tana mehadra layla v'kanasev lekra diyamama. So we'll say the Gemara is essentially asking two questions. Question number one is, why do you assume that the primary Kiddush is by day, so that you ask the question, how do I know that I should make Kiddush at night? If anything, it's just the opposite. The primary Kiddush is at night. Why? Because that's the start of Shabbos. So it makes sense that primary Kiddush is at the start of Shabbos. That's question number one. Question number two is then you ask, how do I know that I should make Kiddush by night? And what's the pasuk you quote? Zachar es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. Yom seems to indicate day and not night. So what's going on over here? Hachi Kamar. So we'll say, listen to this very important Gemara. This is what we mean to say. Hachi Kamar. Zachar es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. Zachreu alayayin b'chinisaso. So when the pasuk says, remember the Shabbos day to sanctify it, from there we learn to go ahead and remember the Shabbos on a glass of wine, b'chinisaso, at the entrance of Shabbos, which makes sense. Because the primary concept of Kiddush will be at the start of Shabbos. Eili ela balayla. So I just want to point out, understand, the pasuk when it says Zachar Soma Shabbos L'Kadsho, so the Gemara, we saw some Shabbos, right? The Gemara understands that obviously, Zechira is bidvarim, right? Zechira is through a recitation. The concept of making Kiddush al hakos is a dirabanan. It's a dirabanan, so ultimately what dirabanan said is, take the words, take the declarative statement sanctifying Shabbos and arrange it on a cup of wine. So the Gemara so just don't get confused here. The Gemara is not suggesting that mid'oraisa you make Kiddush ala kos. The Gemara is just saying like this. Mid'oraisa, Zochar means bidvarim, with words. And Chazal said, we would like you to arrange those words over a cup of wine. So when do I do that? Logically, I'm doing that at night, at the entrance of Shabbos. Ainli ala balayla. So I only know that there's a din of Kiddush at night, biyom minayin. How do I know that Allah Lamaisa, there is a din of Kiddush as well by day? Talmud Lomar, Zachar es Yom HaShabbos. Therefore we'll say, because the pasuk says, Zachar es Yom HaShabbos. So we'll say the drush is like this. The pasuk could have just said, Zachar es HaShabbos. And from what would I learn from Zachar es HaShabbos? What would I have learned? They make Kiddush when? At night. Right? Because you can remember, but so now what the Gemara is saying is the most logical, intuitive time, meaning it goes out saying that the Kiddush, of course, is going to be made at night. Why? Because you have to sanctify Shabbos when it enters. When does it enter? At night. So therefore, the pasuk says you have to make Kiddush, Zachreu b'dvarim, you have to make Kiddush ultimately at night. How do I know that I also have to make Kiddush by day? Because the Torah essentially adds in an extra word. What's the extra word? Yom. Zachar es Yom HaShabbos. So essentially what comes out is like this. Zachar es HaShabbos teaches me that I make Kiddush by night, at the entry, right? At the beginning of Shabbos, I have to sanctify it with words. Zachar es Yom HaShabbos teaches me that I also make Kiddush by day. So we'll say, so just to understand the progression over here. The first step is the Doraisa. The Doraisa is Kiddush. What's the Doraisa of Kiddush? How do you fulfill that Doraisa? How do you fulfill Doraisa? Words. So we'll say again, we fulfill it with, we could do it a number of different ways. It could be Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos in Kabbalah Shabbos. It could be Vayichula that we recite in Shmona Esrei, or after Shmona Esrei, could be a good Shabbos, or it could be the words of Kiddush. Chazal said, we want you to arrange Kiddush a la kos. So remember again, reciting Kiddush over a cup of wine is a d'Rabbanan. What the Gemara here is doing is blending it all together. The Gemara is looking at Friday night Kiddush as a fulfillment of the Doraisa. So now the progression goes like this. I know that when the Torah says Zachar Yom HaShabbos, that's obviously referring to Kiddush on Friday night. Because intuitively, you have to sanctify the Shabbos with words at the entrance of Shabbos, right? So I'm going to sanctify it with words, and then I'm also going to add in the cup of wine. That's the D'Rabbanan. Then the Gemara says, how do I know that also Halacha L'Maisa, I have to recite Kiddush by day? Because the Pasuk says, Zachar es Yom HaShabbos. Didn't have to say Yom. Yom teaches me by day. Beautiful. B'Yom Ma'im Mevarich. So ask the Gemara, what is the daytime Kiddush? Oh, right. What is the daytime Kiddush? So we'll say what is that Kiddush? So I'm Rav Yehuda Brei Pri Hagafen. So let's listen to this. Rav Yehuda said, "L'chol b'nei Yisrael lo yecharatz kelev l'shono." And it was an incredible thing. The Gemara says that when you hear dogs barking, one of two things: either it's the Malach HaMaves or Eliyahu Hanavi. It's a halavai to be Eliyahu Hanavi. Mir Hashem. Says the Gemara, I'm Rav Yehuda. So what's Kiddush by day? What's Kiddush by day? So Gemara says, Rav Yehuda says, Brei Pri Hagafen. Brei Pri Hagafen. That is the entirety of the Kiddush by day. So says the Gemara as follows. So we'll say, so now this is very interesting. All right, let's read a little bit weiter. Rav Ashi ikla l'mechuza. So we'll say, listen to this story. So now this is the totality of Kiddush by day. We spoke about this already in yesterday's daf a little bit. There is no additional bracha of Kiddush. Kiddush by day, I'm assuming it's Scott's dog. So, what are you going to do? Okay, I get nervous when people say they're going to handle something. All right. So yeah, comes in different forms. So I'll say, so the Gemara says as follows. So Rav Yehuda says Brei Pri Hagafen. So the Kiddush by day, by definition is just Borei Pri Hagafen. So now the Gemara tells an incredible story. Wow. Okay, nice. Well done. So the Gemara says as follows. Rav Ashi ikal Mechuza. Rav Ashi went to the city of Mechuzah. Both listen to this story. Amrulei, so he came to Mechuzah. He was there for Shabbos. So it's Kiddush on Shabbos day in Mechuzah. Amrulei, they said to him, Likdash lon mar Kiddush Rabba. Rabbi, Rav Ashi, please make for us the great Kiddush. Kiddush Rabba. So listen to this. So the Gemara says, Savar ma'inihu Kiddush Rabba. So Rav Ashi said, what is Kiddush Rabba? I never heard of this before. What is this great Kiddush? So Rav Ashi said to himself as follows. Amr, Michti kalabrachas kulam Brei Pri Hagafen Amri Bereisha. So we'll say Amri. So we'll listen to this. Amri Bereisha. So we'll say, listen to this. Rav Ashi said, well look, I don't know what Kiddush Rabba is, but here's what I know. Every Kiddush has, as part of it, Brei Pri Hagafen. Right? So listen to Rav Ashi's chap. He says like this. So I'm going to say, Amri Brei Pri Hagafen, Va'agid Bey. So Rav Ashi says like this. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start with the bracha Brei Pri Hagafen. Va'agid Bey means I'm going to go ahead and look at the Rashbam. Va'agid Bey herich boladas em yisarhev echad mehem lishtos or bekach yovin de Brei Pri Hagafen regila lomar v'sulo. But listen, Rav Ashi has this great chap. I'm going to say Brei Pri Hagafen, and I'm going to prolong the bracha a little bit of chazonas. I'm going to prolong the bracha and see what people do. So watch this. So as he's prolonging his Brei Pri Hagafen, there's always that guy at the Kiddush. Right? Who's the guy at the Kiddush? Right? He hasn't eaten in 41 minutes. So now, again, he can't wait for Rav Ashi to finish the Kiddush. So as Rav Ashi is doing his chazonis thing, an older guy, he's already digging into the chalent, or he's already drinking his wine. So we'll say, so what did Rav Ashi say? He said what they called Kiddush Rabba was what? Just the bracha of Borei Pri Hagafen. That was the totality of their Kiddush. So what happened? So Chazia Lahu Sabbat the Gachen B'Shasi, before he even finished the Brei Pri Hagafen, as he was doing his chazonis, he saw there was an older gentleman who had begun to drink already. Karya Nafshe Hachacham Einav Berosho. Ultimately, again, so he said about himself, quoting the pasuk from Koheles, the wise one, literally again, Einav Berosha, Rabbo says, another way of saying is able to foresee the future. That a wise person is able to think ahead. So Rav Ashi, again, doesn't know, when they ask him to recite Kiddusha Rabbah, he does not know what Kiddusha Rabbah is. He knows for sure that whatever it is, it includes Brei Priagafen. Let me prolong the bracha a little bit and see, because his chap was like this. If there was more to come after Brei Priagafen, people would still remain at attention. But if it was only Brei Priagafen, and he dragged on the bracha, as happened when people drag things on, somebody tends to lose patience and begins to eat. So he said that sure enough, the Zakin began to eat, and therefore he realized that it was just Brei Priagafen. So I will say, it's interesting to know about this. So this Gemara, I thought to myself, why didn't Rav Ashi just ask? Right? When they ask him to recite Kiddusha Rabbah, why doesn't he just say, by the way, what's Kiddush Rabbah? So we'll say, so perhaps it's important to know, Rav Ashi was the Rosh Yeshiva of Surah. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of Surah. So it could very well be that he felt that it was not Kavod Torah for him to ask what Kiddusha Rabbah was. It's possible that I will say sometimes, the kavod of a Talmud Chacham is not his own kavod. The kavod of a Talmud Chacham is kavod Torah, is the kavod of the Rosh, which is why there are certain things that a Talmud Chacham could be mevat. There are certain things that a Talmud Chacham could say, I'm not makbid on my kavod, but other things that a Talmud Chacham cannot yield in his kavod. Because again, his kavod is not his own. His kavod is the kavod of Torah, his kavod is the kavod of Ibn Shalom. So it could very well be that Rav Ashi felt, and this was obviously a public setting. He's a scholar in residence, he's a scholar in the city of Mechuzah. So again, they're asking to recite Kiddusha Rabbah. This was obviously a public thing. He could have felt that it just wasn't Kavod Torah for him to ask what Kiddusha Rabbah was. So he figured, you know what? I'll figure it out. What else could it? He didn't know. Obviously, in Rav Ashi's own experience, all there was Brei Priagafen. So halacha l'maaseh, he figured, let me try this, and sure enough, it worked. Now, I'll point out something very interesting to you. So if you look at the Rashbam, go back a little bit in the second wide line of the Rashbam. So we'll say, this is indeed this halacha l'maaseh. Kiddush so today, based on this Gemara, we call the daytime Kiddush Kiddusha Rabbah. In fact, in some Siddurim, it's actually printed this way. Kiddusha Rabbah. Which, of course, we'll say is an interesting lashon, because what is Kiddusha Rabbah comprised of? All Kiddush by day is Brei Priagafen. It's very important, because sometimes if a person doesn't have a Siddur, you don't have to fumfer over Zachar Sam Shabbos Lekatsha if you don't know it. In other words, if a person doesn't have the psukim in front of them, all you have to say is Borei Priagafen. The fact that we append some psukim onto it, that's a very beautiful thing, but that's not part of the Kiddush. So look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Avram Yehuda Amarav. So again, the Rashbam says, Asoy Kasa de Chamra, Ubruchi Umishti, Mishum Kavod Shabbos. So both say, so here's what's interesting. Why do we do this on Shabbos day? Right? Think about this for just a moment. We've already agreed, the Rabbi will say, when is biblical Kiddush? When is there a din of biblical Kiddush? At night. Right? At night. Which makes sense. The concept of biblical Kiddush applies ultimately again at night at the entrance of Shabbos. So it could very well be that what the Gemara is saying beforehand is that halacha l'maisa, there's another form of biblical Kiddush by day, Zachar es Yom HaShabbos. But no one really seems to feel that the daytime Kiddush is biblical, right? It seems that everybody is agreeing that halacha l'maisa, the daytime Kiddush, is rabbinic. V'haraya, we'll say if it was biblical, what would it have? If it was biblical, what would it have? It would have a bracha of Kiddush. Remember again, Friday night, you make a bracha of Kiddush, Mekadesh HaShabbos. Shabbos day, there's no bracha of Kiddush, as we just said, it's Brei Priagafen. So if it's Brei Priagafen, that clearly indicates that it's not a biblical obligation. If it's not a biblical obligation, then ultimately, again, what am I doing with this daytime Kiddush? So we'll say, this Rashbam is quite fascinating. The Rashbam says, Umishte Mishum Kavod Shabbos. Daytime Kiddush is a din in Kavod Shabbos, honoring the Shabbos. How so? So he says, Lechalik b'mida Shabbos, lemidas chol, shu inyan shir, shein omrim shira ella al hayayin. V'hachi mefarish b'shiltos Rav Achai, parshas vayishma Yosef. So we'll say, this is beautiful. Why do you make Kiddush by day? To distinguish between a Shabbos lunch and a weekday lunch. That's the chilik. that a weekday lunch, now, we'll say a weekday lunch you might very well wash. So, right, washing is not necessarily a distinction. That's true. Shabbos that you have lechem mishnah. The pashtas, you're not going to have that during a weekday meal. But the way we distinguish between a weekday meal and a Shabbos meal is ultimately, again, by saying shira before the meal. And shira, the Gemara teaches us, in shira ella al hayayin. The most bakavadik shira is ultimately, again, said over wine. This is Gemara Maseches Brachas as well. Ein omrim shira ella al hayayin. So the Rebbe says it's quite beautiful. So therefore, really, it turns out as follows. Really, what daytime kiddush is, it's quite beautiful. It's shira. It's shira. So halacha lamaisa again. And why do I sing shira before the daytime meal? To distinguish between Shabbos lunch and a regular lunch. So I say shira before the meal. Einom shira ella al hayayin. Shira is only said over a cup of wine. That's daytime kiddush. So it was like quite beautiful. Good. Amri b'nei Rabbi Chia. So Rabbi Chia said as follows. Okay, we're good. So we'll say if you don't make Havdalah, switching back. Havdalah, if you don't make Havdalah Matzah Shabbos, you can make Havdalah throughout the entire week. Now what does that mean? V'ad kama, how long? Rabbi Zera ad revi'i b'Shabbos, until Wednesday. Now both say, now just understand, what does until Wednesday mean? It means until Tuesday night. Right? It means you can make Kiddush Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, until Tuesday night. Till Tuesday night, so the Gemara says, Kihad Yosef Rabbi Zera kamed Ravasi, v'amri la Ravasi kamed Rabbi Yochanan, v'Yosef v'ka'amar, le'inyan Gittin. Well, say, where do you learn this from? This is fascinating. From Gittin, what do we find by Gittin? Chada b'shabsa, trei b'shabsa, utlasa b'shabsa, utlasa basar shabsa. For Gittin purposes, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday are considered to be after Shabbos, and Wednesday, Thursday, Friday are considered to be before Shabbos. Now, we'll say, now, what does this have to do with anything? Look at Rashbam, Linyan Gittin. This is great. Linyan Gittin. Im Amar la hareze gitech amanas shetitni li reish zuz achar haShabbos. Amanas shetisneim li kodem haShabbos. Let's listen to this. Let's say a man gives a woman a get with a condition. You can give a conditional get. So a man says to a woman, I hereby give you this get on the condition that you give me 200 zuz after Shabbos. So we'll say, so now when interpreting that tonight, what does after Shabbos mean? So after Shabbos means Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Let's say a man says to a woman, you must give me 200 zuz before Shabbos. Before Shabbos can mean Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So just it's very interesting. Just like by a get, before Shabbos and after Shabbos. So after Shabbos, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Before Shabbos, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So too, if you miss Havdalah on Motzei Shabbos, you can say Havdalah after Shabbos. As long as you can, essentially, you could say Havdalah in the part of the week that is still tethered to the previous Shabbos. Which part of the week is tethered to the previous Shabbos? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Incredible. So the Gemara says as follows. However, the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi avalo ala or. They both say, when you recite Havdalah, you could recite Havdalah Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, that refers to the bracha of Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol on a cup of wine. But it comes along the Gemara says, but you won't use Eish. You won't use fire. Now, why won't you use fire? The Rashbam says, Im lo berach al ha'or, last Rashbam, Im lo berach al ha'or bar mira Eish, b'matzei Shabbos, shuv eina mevarech. Kach nir li etam ha'davar ki desai makom shenagu, im mevarachim bo ela b'leil matzei Shabbos, hol tchilas b'yas Eish. We'll say, why do we make a bracha bar mira Eish on matzei Shabbos? Why? Because Matzei Shabbos is when Hashem created fire. So the symbolism of fire, of course we discussed also that fire also represents dynamic activity, but the idea is the primary symbolism is the creation of fire. So therefore fire is only used when you make Havdalah Matzei Shabbos. So what the Shulchan Aruch brings in, there's one more thing you omit if you don't make Havdalah Matzei Shabbos, and that is Besamim. Because let's remember again, what's the role of Besamim? Because the Neshama is sad after the departure of Shabbos, the Besamim are Ma'orer. They take care of the eitzah, the sadness of the neshama. So both say, and this is indeed halacha l'maisa. So if you miss Havdalah on Matzei Shabbos for some reason, halacha l'maisa, you could recite Havdalah on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, but the Havdalah that you recite during the week is only going to be the bracha B'rei Pri HaGafen and the bracha of Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol. Once you miss Matzei Shabbos, you no longer make Borei Ma'orei Ha'esh, nor do you make Borei Minei B'Samim. Quite beautiful. Amra Barona, Amra. Both say this is, it's it's hard to get over this, right? It's really hard to get over this. I feel like if we had the coffee station back in the shul, I feel like there'd be a little bit more excitement about these Gemaras, right? Because, right, Moshe David, you're on this? You got this? Okay, good. So I'll say, so maybe like a cappuccino maker or something. Maybe we could up our espresso. We could up our game a little bit. We'll say, but these are like incredible Gemaras, line after line are just incredible. Some Rabbeinu Marav. So we'll say, Rabbeinu Marav. Maybe I should unmute the Zoom Chavra. Maybe there'd be a little bit more excitement. Although half of their pictures are off, so I don't know what that means. It could be that they're napping. So the Gemara says as follows. Rabbeinu Marav. So I will say, so again, Rabbeinu says the name of Rav as follows. Hanota, Amud Beis. Hanota Yadav Lo Yikadish. I will say this is a great case that is going to open the door to an incredible halacha. So we'll say, listen to this. So Rabbeinu says the name of Rav. If a person washes, so we'll say, here's the situation. It's Shabbos. It doesn't really matter Shabbos night, Shabbos day. It's all the same thing. So we know, the Gemara is assuming the normal order of things is, you make Kiddush. So we'll say, right, if we're setting up our optimal experience. What's the optimal experience? What do you have on the table at the time of Kiddush? Nothing, right? Your Lechem Mishnah at most, right? Your Lechem Mishnah. Now the truth is you're supposed to have your Lechem Mishnah, because your Lechem Mishnah, I'm sorry? Right, correct. Calm down. You're going to drink your wine, all right? We'll get there. Take it easy there. All right, so again, so you can have your Kiddush cup, you can have your wine, you can have your Lechem Mishnah covered, because that establishes your Kiddush Makom Suda, but nothing else. And then you'll make your Kiddush, you'll go wash, you'll have your Amotzi, then you'll bring everything out. Fine. So we'll say, but here's the following case. Let's say somebody washed before Kiddush. They just washed, whatever the Metzias is. So we'll say, so now watch this. So Rabbeinu says the name of Rab, if you washed before Kiddush, Lo Yikadesh. You shouldn't make Kiddush. Now what does it mean you shouldn't make Kiddush? Look at the Rashbam. This is very, very, very exciting. Nato Yodav Lo Yikadesh, Ela Achar Yikadesh, Achar Yikadesh, V'hu Yotze Yidei Chavaso, Bishmiya Ushtiya. So now watch this. What Rav is saying is like this. If you washed before Kiddush, you, the person who washed, should not make Kiddush. Rather, what should you do? You should listen to someone else's Kiddush and be Yotze with the other individual's Kiddush. The Ein Kan Hesach Hadas, Me'achar Shabbat. But 1 second. Isn't that a hefsek? Right? Between washing and Hamotzi? No. Since you're not the one reciting the Kiddush, the Ein Kan Hesach Hadas, Me'achar Shu Atzmo Eino Mavarich. Aval hu atzmo lo yikadesh im natal yadav kiddush yochal al smach netila dilifnei kiddush the kiddush mafsik bein netila lachila v'have kehesech hadas uboy netila achrisi baser kiddusha the takeh for the netilas naim suda ubeshil kiddush lo boy netila. I'm just going to read danotal yadav leperos harizim megas erach hakamashlalom the netila shefnei kiddush eno ololo lefichach yikadesh tchila va'achar kach notal yadav. So let's listen to this. In general, let's take a step back. So, in general, the reason makes sense. I'm not going to make Kiddush and then wash. Why? Because they're both say again, let me say it differently. I'm not going to wash and then make Kiddush, because the recitation of Kiddush will be a Hesach Hadas, will be a lapse in awareness. When you wash, you're supposed to wash and eat as quickly as possible, right? And there shouldn't be anything interrupted between your washing and your Kiddush. So therefore, again, under normal circumstances, I make Kiddush, then I wash. In this case, we'll call him Ruvain. Ruvain washed first. So really, we don't want Ruvain making Kiddush. Why don't we want Ruvain making Kiddush? Because if he actively makes Kiddush, right, even if he himself doesn't drink the wine, the recitation of Kiddush, by definition, is an interruption between the Netila and Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz. Therefore, Rav says it's very simple. Ruvain, be quiet. Don't say anything. You don't make Kiddush. Let Shimon make Kiddush. You'll listen to Shimon's Kiddush. Shimon will drink it, and you'll be Yotze with Shimon's Kiddush. But this way, because you are silent, there's no Hesach Hadas, there's no lapse in awareness between your Natilas Yadayim and your Hamotzi, and you're good to go. Finished Rashbam. The Kol Shekain, he says, Da'anotel Yodav lo Yavdil. Okay, he goes on, he says, V'had v'kamar natal lo yikadesh shelo or mekadesh shechoser v'notel Yodav da'hainu mishum dolo ba'in at time trei zimni. So we'll say, now watch this. So Rav says, so this is what you do. Normally, again, I will say, normal order is Kiddush, then Netilas, then Hamotzi. if Ruvain messed up the order and he washed first, and he already made the bracha of al netilas yadayim. So we'll say, we're not going to say to him, oh, just Ruvain, just go make Kiddush. Why won't we tell him to make Kiddush? Why not? Because then it's Hesach Hadas. If it's Hesach Hadas, then what? He has to wash again. If he has to wash again, then what? Another bracha. Which means that he's goreim another bracha. We don't like people making brachas unnecessarily. So therefore, Rav says, Ruvain, if you mistakenly washed before Kiddush, not a problem. This is fine. We could salvage the situation. Just be quiet. Don't recite Kiddush. Be yotze with Shimon's Kiddush. Right? Now, again, Reuven is going to listen. Reuven's not going to drink. He's just going to listen quietly. And therefore, again, let Shimon make Kiddush. Shimon will be Motziim in Kiddush. Shimon will drink. Rabbi remember, going to be established that in order to be Yotzei someone's Kiddush, you don't have to drink. I was supposed to say, it's a nice thing to drink from the Kiddush wine, but you don't have to drink from the Kiddush wine in order to be Yotzei. So Reuven, just be quiet. Listen attentively. You'll be Yotzei. You'll salvage your Netilas Yadayim. Let Reuven make Kiddush. Everybody will go wash. They'll make Hamotzi. Shalom HaYisrael. Shalom HaYisrael. We'll say, now watch this. This gets wild. Amr Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta. So Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta says back to Rav Verona, who quoted Rav, Akatil nachnaf shei Rav. Rebbe isn't even dead yet. Shachachinu l'shmaisa say, and you've forgotten his rulings. Zimnin sagien hadahava kamina kamei Rav. Many times I was in front of Rav. I will say, watch this. Zimnin dechaviva alei rifta mekadesh arifta. Sometimes when Rav was more in the mood for challah than for wine. Craziness. Whoever heard of such a thing like this? But apparently, again, sometimes Rav wanted challah more than wine. So what happened? Mekadesh arifta. He would make kiddush on bread. On challah. Zimin dechaviva lechamra. Mekadesh achamra. Sometimes he liked wine better, so he made kiddush on wine. So we'll say, now watch this. Let's analyze this just a moment. And we'll say, how do you make kiddush on challah? How do you make kiddush on challah? Right? What's the order? Step 1? Wash. Right? Step 1, wash. Then you recite kiddush. Regular kiddush. Yom HaShishi v'Chol Shemar Haaretz. Regular kiddush. Then Sabim Rav Say Brachat Hashem Kino Melech Haolam Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz. Then the bracha of Kiddush, Mekadesh HaShabbos, then you sit down to eat your challah. That's how you make Kiddush. That's how you make Kiddush over challah. So comes along Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel and says to Rav Barona, what are you talking about? You're quoting Rav as saying that halacha l'maisa, if you washed first, you can't make Kiddush. But yet Rav himself sometimes would make Kiddush over challah. Now I will say, now the truth is, they're not contradicting each other. They're talking about two different cases, right? Rav Barona's talking about a case where halacha l'maisa, again, Kiddush is being made over wine. Reuven accidentally washed first. So in that case, Rav would say, listen, again, we don't want you making another on Netilas Yadayim. So therefore, again, just be silent. Don't recite Kiddush. Be yotzei with someone else. All Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel is coming along and saying is, by the way, you know, you could also make Kiddush on challah. And now the novelty over that's being expressed is that halacha l'maisa, Rav would make Kiddush over whatever he was in the mood for, which is quite fascinating. So if he was more in the mood for challah, he would make Kiddush over challah. If he was more in the mood for wine, he would make Kiddush over wine. Now, both say, now understand, it's not just the difference of what you're making Kiddush over. Depending on what you're making Kiddush over, fundamentally changes the order of everything. Because if halacha l'maisa, you're making Kiddush ultimately again over challah, then what? You're washing first. But I will say, what does come out is something very interesting. Obviously, if you're making Kiddush over challah, Kiddush is not what? It's not a hefsek. Which I will say makes sense. Because halacha l'maisa, the definition of a hefsek is what? What's the definition of a hefsek? Something that is extraneous to what it's all said. This is why this is very important. You know that halacha l'maisa, if let's say you made hamotzi, and this is a scene that plays itself out in many a Jewish home, and somebody forgot to bring the knife to the table. So first of all, the easiest thing, if somebody forgot to bring the knife to the table, so what do? Get up, right? Get up. Right? That's number one. But let's say, again, some people are royalty, they don't get up and get their own knife. So you know what happens? Like, people start playing a game of charades, right? Right? This, that, and no one has any idea what you're talking about, right? So, the Mishnah Berurah says, you could say, knife. Now, I don't know that barking knife at someone is going to have a good impact on your shalom bayis or anything else of that matter. But lamaisa, it's not a hafsik. It's not a hafsik. Why is it not a hafsik? Because again, it's not extraneous, right? So if you say something that has nothing to do with hamotzi, that's a hafsik. So this is very interesting. So when you're making kiddush on challah, see, this was the point that Rabbi Yitzchak was trying to make. Rav Barona quoted Rav as saying that if you washed and then you make kiddush, that's a hefsek. Rav Yitzchak was saying, you see, according to Rav, it's not a hefsek. It's not really fair. You're right. Kiddush is not a hefsek when for Netez Daim when you're making kiddush on bread. Right? So when you're making kiddush on bread, so ultimately again, then kiddush is not a hefsek between the tilas daim and hamotzi, which makes sense. That's because the the bread, the challah is the primary utensil, the primary kli, the primary entity for kiddush. That's when kiddush is not a hefsek. But einachinami, if you washed, and then you're making kiddush ala yayin, if you were to recite that kiddush, einachinami, that could be a hefsek. So they both say, what comes out of here, something very interesting, is that Allah chalamaysa, first of all, we're being introduced to the idea that you can make kiddush over challah, which is really quite interesting. That's number one. Number two, we're also being introduced to is, at least according to Rav, you could choose to make kiddush over whatever you want. So if you're starving and you want your challah now, right? You want your challah now, and you want to make kiddush over your challah, according to Rav, we'll see the Shulchan Aruch is not like that, but according to Rav, halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and make kiddush over your challah. We also see that if you do make kiddush over challah, wash first, regular kiddush, just substitute hamotzi ultimately again for a priyagafen, then the rest of kiddush, and after mekadesh Shabbos, you sit down, and halacha l'maisi, you go ahead and you break bread. You go ahead and you cut your challah and you eat your challah. And I will say, take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says over here, the chaviva le rifta, she'eroiv mekadesh rifta, amalo boy netila achrisi. Okay, so we have to go for the rest of this. We have to go through the rest of the Shulchan. So we'll say, so how do we deal with this halacha l'maisa? So we'll say, this is actually quite fascinating, and if you're a Yekesh Jew, right, the Yekas, well, let's see the Shulchan Aruch. So Shulchan Aruch says as follows, this is in Siman Reish Ayin Aleph Sif Yud Beis. Achar she'ikadesh alakos, Reish Ayin Aleph Yud Beis. Achar she'ikadesh alakos, notel yadav umevarich al netilas yadayim. So far, so good, right? After you recite Kiddush, you wash your hands, netilas yadayim. Vimnotel yadav kodem kiddush, but if you went ahead and you washed your hands prior to kiddush, you did netilas daim first, then gali daite derifta chavivaloi v'lo yikadish al yain al alapas. So we'll say the way the Mechaber Paskin is like this: the proper order on a regular Shabbos is kiddush al yain and then netilas yadayim. But if you washed before kiddush, so the Mechaber says that clearly shows that what? That Allah chalamaysa, you want challah more than you want wine, which is fine, but then you should make kiddush over your challah. That's what the Mechaber Paskins. The Rabbi say, get ready for this. V'yesh omrim, this is the Ramah. V'yesh omrim dilchatchila yesh lito yadav kodem hakiddush ulekadish al hayayim. The Ramah says there are those who say l'chatchila, you should always wash first. Wash first before kiddush. Even if you're making kiddush on wine. Even if you're making kiddush on wine. Shabbos say, this is the opinion of the Rosh, the Mordechai in Arvei Pesachim, V'chein minag pashit b'medinos elu. And the Ramah writes, this is the minag. This, I see Michael shaking his head, right? The Yekas always love this. Right? So I'll say, so listen to this. And this is the minhag. This is the minhag HaPashim Dinasenu. This is the minhag among Ashkenazic Jewry to go ahead and wash first before Kiddush. We'll say, not Kiddush on bread. Regular Kiddush on Friday night. Regular Kiddush on Friday night. You go ahead and you wash first. You sit down, you go ahead, or you make Kiddush al Yain, bright Priyagaf, Mekadosh Shabbos, drink your wine, and then what do you do after you drink your wine? Right after, what do you do? Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. You wash first. He says, ve'ein l'shanos. He says, you should not change this minhag, says the Ramah, with the exception of Belel Pesach. This is great. All of our worlds are coming together. This is incredible. One exception, Leil Pesach. Pesach night, Seder night is going to be the one exception where everyone agrees you don't go ahead and wash before Kiddush. Rabbi say, that's obvious. Why don't you wash before Kiddush on Pesach night? Because remember, there's a huge half-sek. Remember, you're not eating hamotzi, right, till motzi matzah. So motzi matzah. So that's much later on. So the Rama will say even those who go ahead and normally wash before Kiddush, right? Wash, regular Kiddush, Agafen, drink your wine, then hamotzi, will agree that on Leil Pesach, of course you don't do that. You don't do that ultimately again because there is too much of hefsek. So Rabbi say, let's take a look at this because this is mind blowing. And Rabbi say, the also reason why this is mind blowing is because this is the Ramah. This is the Ramah. Yet again, I would venture to say that most of us, unless if you're of Germanic descent, do not do this. So what's the pshat? Where does this come from? And why does the Ramah say that this is the proper posh lechatchila? So listen to this. So the Mishnah Berurah explains. He says the Sirale. Deina Kiddush Mikra Hefsek. Shabbos, the first thing we learn is that Kiddush is not really called the Hefsek, which makes sense. Why isn't Kiddush Hefsek, Shabbos? Why not? Think about this, just in general. Why wouldn't Kiddush be called the Hefsek? Let's say if you were to go ahead and wash on the Tilas Adayim, then make Kiddush, on a cup of wine. Why is that not called the Hefsek to your Hamotzi? Why not? Because you have to say Kiddush before you eat. He'll say, remember again, Kiddush Makusu, you can't have a Suda on Shabbos. You can't eat your Hamotzi without a Kiddush. So it's not extraneous. It's part and parcel to the consumption. Ulekach. So once I establish that Kiddush is not a hefsek, Ulekach, Yekadish ala yain v'yishtal hakos, v'achar kach yivarech Hamotzi v'yivatzi apas, v'cheivan den hefsek, sirlei drama, the tov lino kin lechatchila. Mishum dechishein lo yain mekadesh alapas bal karach tzarach litoyado. So also listen to this. The Ramasar is very large. The Ramasar is very clear. The Ramasar is like this. Number one, Kiddush is not a hefsek, right? That's Aleph. Kiddush is not a hefsek. Why isn't Kiddush a hefsek? Because halacha lamaisa, again, Kiddush is not extraneous. Kiddush is necessary to the Suda. So that's Aleph. Beis Rama says, let's say you don't have wine. So what do you make Kiddush on if you don't have wine? If you don't have wine, pas, right? Bread. And how do you make Kiddush ala pas? What do you do first? Netilas Adayim. Shabbos say, essentially what the Ramah says is like this. Since there's a situation where you'd have to wash first anyway, and Kiddush is not a hefsek, the Ramah says, let's just create Kiddush uniformity. Just create Kiddush uniformity. It shouldn't be that Kiddush looks one way, this time looks one way, a different time. Let's just make it uniform. And what's the only way you could make Kiddush uniform, and it's uniform under all circumstances, is how? Wash first. That way, again, it's uniform. So no matter whether you're making Kiddush, remember, so Marashach, if you're making Kiddush on wine and you wash first, is it a problem? No, because Kiddush is not a hefsek anyway. And if you're making Kiddush halapas, anyway, you'd be washing first. So the Ramah therefore says, let's just make it uniform. It's not the Ramah, it's the Rosh, right? The Mordechai. Let's just make it uniform. One size fits every single situation. Therefore, the Ramah says, always wash first, then make Kiddush. And if you're making Kiddush on wine, fantastic. Make your Kiddush on wine, drink your Hagafen, and then immediately afterwards, make your Hamotzi. Now watch this, he goes on, he says, so again, so for the Ramah's logic is, just create a uniform practice. So we don't have to get into a situation of, this week I have wine, next week I don't have wine. So this week Kiddush looks like this, next week Kiddush looks like that. Just create a uniform practice. And the only way to create a uniform Kiddush practice is to go ahead and wash first, then Kiddush, whatever you're making Kiddush over. If it's wine, make your Hagafen, drink your wine, and then your Hamotzi. If it's just Hamotzi, then finish your Kiddush, Makadesh HaShabbos, and then ultimately again eat your Challah. Now, Rabbi say, what's the pushback to this? So the Ramah says, this is the midah, don't change. The pushback says the Mishnah Berurah, this is Sifkan Samech Beis, Zekama Achrona Kasvu, the Tfei Adif Lachatchil Kadesh Hayim Kodem Tiyazadayim, Ugidas HaMechaber, Tebazeh Yotze Medina L'chal Hadeos. Ubekama Makomos Nago Kidivrayim. Shabbos say, so listen to this. The Mishnah Berurah quotes other opinions and they say no. That many opinions argue on this Rosh and the Mordechai that the Ramah quote and they say no. It's true, if you're making Kiddush on Challah, you wash first, then Kiddush, then Challah. But halacha l'maisa, if you're making Kiddush on wine, many opinions hold that halacha l'maisa, it is better to make Kiddush first on the wine, then wash, then make your hamotzi. Why? Because we see, at least according to one opinion in the Gemara, that halacha l'maisa, some do consider Kiddush to be a hefsek. So in order to go ahead and satisfy everyone's opinion, don't wash before Kiddush. So I just want to point out something very interesting. There's a lot of halachic literature about this, because usually the yekas are the minority. Baruch Hashem. Right? Sorry. Right. Usually yekas are the minority. It is fascinating here that in this particular situation, general Ashkenazic practice is not like the Ramah. Right? General Ashkenazic practice is not to always wash first, but in fact is to go ahead and first make it, assuming you're making Kiddush on wine. So we'll say, so general Ashkenazic practice is as follows. If you're making Kiddush ala yayin, make your Kiddush, Brei Pri Hagafen, Mekadesh HaShabbos, drink your wine, then it tells them, then Hamotzi. Of course, if you're making Kiddush ala Pas on Chala, you will wash first, then you'll make your Kiddush. Now obviously no Hagafen, you'll make Hamotzi, Mekadesh HaShabbos, eat your challah. So we'll say, so again, there's a lot of halachic literature as to why exactly general practice does not go like the Ramah. You see, according to the Mishnah Berurah, because why would we adopt a general practice that some disagree with? In other words, there is an opinion that holds that Kiddush is a hefsek. So therefore, again, if you don't have to wash first, then don't wash first. But we'll say, we'll take something very interesting. The poskim bring down that even if one does not normally conduct themselves like this, if you need to do this in order to make things easier, you're allowed to do so. We'll say, where does this come up all the time? Sukkos. Sukkos is a great... We'll say Sukkos presents a little bit of a logistical issue, because what happens? Many homes, you get everybody into the sukkah for Kiddush, and then what? Everybody's got to go back into the house and it doesn't come back out. So the post can actually bring down that for Kiddush, if you want to go ahead and avail yourself of the minhag of the Ramah, to go ahead and wash first before Kiddush, that one could do so. Again, just interesting. Again, I don't know if I don't know that lechatchila necessarily one should do that, but sometimes there are significant people, especially who live in apartment buildings. This comes up all the time. If you live in a house and the sukkah is really just a question of going from the deck inside. So okay, it might be annoying, but it's not really an inconvenience. But a person lives in an apartment building, so again, going into the sukkah for Kiddush, coming back out for the test time, that could really go ahead and represent a hardship. One could definitely rely on the Ramah and go ahead and wash first, and then ultimately again come out for Kiddush and do everything once you're in the sukkah. Good about that. Let's just do another line because we have just another 2 minutes. Look at the Ramah. Finish up. Amrav Huna. Amrav. Tam Eino Makadish. So if the name of Rav, if you ate on Shabbos night, Tam Eino Makadish means if you ate on Shabbos night, once you ate, you don't make Kiddush. You don't make Kiddush. What does it mean you don't make Kiddush? You'll wait to make Kiddush until the next day. What about Havdalah? What happens if you ate on Motzei Shabbos before Havdalah? Do we say, well, once you ate on Motzei Shabbos, that's it. You'll may take Havdalah tomorrow. Amar lei, ani omer tam mavdil. I say that even if you ate on Motzei Shabbos, you still make Havdalah. For Ravasi said, Tam Eino Mavd. Ravasi said, no, halacha l'maisa, if you ate on Motzei Shabbos, you wait to make Havdalah until Sunday. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba ikle bi Ravasi. So what's Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba listened to this, went to the house of Ravasi. Ishtali, he forgot, v'ta'im midi. He forgot and he ate something Motzei Shabbos before Havdalah. Then afterwards, Havale Kasa, they gave him a cup of wine, va'avdil, and he made Havdalah. So we'll say, so what happens? So Amrle Devisu, so Rav Asi's wife said to him, Vahamar lo avatachi. She said, but the master does not conduct himself this way. This was the wife of Rav Asi talking to her husband. Right? She called him the master. Of course, this is what you says. This is normal. Right? So she said, right? The master doesn't usually do this. So he says, Amrle, he said to his wife, Amrla, Shavke Krabes, it's okay. Because Rabbi Yirmiyah ultimately, again, is conducting himself according to his particular Rabbi. So we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Hashem with this discussion tomorrow about Tam Mekadesh, Tam Eino Mekadesh, Tam Mavdil, Tam Eino Mavdil. To be continued tomorrow. Shkayach B'Hossein.